Creature High, Book 1, by Lana Thomas. Prologue. A crisp September sun shone resplendence on the quiet forest, gilding the sea of green pine needles and golden light. The wildlife chittered sleepily through the morning hours, washing the mountain in a hushed woodland symphony. The peaceful lull was interrupted by a lone car, slicing its way through the autumnal air on its journey deeper into the obscure landscape. In the back seat sat Marlene, whose eyes were transfixed on the deluge of trees that whipped past the car window. She sat in absolute silence, quietly waiting. Tears pooled along her eyelids as she dared herself not to blink, steadfastly determined not to miss a single detail that might sweep by. Her vision blurred as her chestnut irises prickled and stung, until at last, her eyes would close for the briefest of moments before fluttering open once again. The drive had now dragged out impossibly long, and she hoped that she might be able to spot at least something soon. Maybe a fleeting glimpse of a turret piercing the line of treetops, or a wisp of tangled smoke tinged in otherworldly hue. Some sign, really any sign at all, that her new life would be beginning this very day. At any moment the trees were due to peel back, the timberline fading away to a monolith of alabaster walls and sparkling windows. A crown of gleaming parapets would jut from the castle's top, dwarfing the woods encompassing it, and its face would be marked with a door of dark, storied wood. Spilling in and out of this grand entrance would be girls bustling about with words of magic dancing from their lips. In their arms they would cradle time-worn tomes bound in musty leather, and in their minds they would repeat the day's lessons of myth and lore. But with every hair-raising turn of the sleek black car in which Marlene sat, the trek only continued on and on, snaking higher up the sun-dappled mountain without as much as a whisper of the ancient secret buried amongst the knotted pines. Marlene's phone buzzed lightly in her pocket, a sudden distraction from the fantasies whirring in her head. She pulled it out quickly with a fast-vanishing hope that it might be a message from her parents. Just as quickly as the thought had come, it ebbed back to the recesses of her mind to be filed away amongst the other stacks of parental disappointments. Instead, the text was an entry into her soccer team's group chat reading, "One last coffee date before junior year?" With a few short swipes of her thumb, Marlene coldly blocked the number from her phone and repocketed it, knowing that this part of her life had ended the moment she stepped out of her house that morning. She sunk back into her seat to wade in embarrassment at the giddiness she had felt, thinking her parents might have been reaching out to her. The night before, as the hours had wound down closer to midnight, there had still been no word from Mr. and Mrs. Cortez. She had still harbored an ill-advised hope that they would somehow appear in the house when she awoke, seeing their only child off as she began her trip to her new school, the school her mother had attended. The school both her parents had repeatedly told her she had been brought into this world to attend. Marlene existed merely as their continued legacy. Had it really been so far-fetched to think that the two might show some interest in this milestone in their daughter's life? At the misty hour of 6 a.m. in the morning, when Marlene wandered down the stairs, she found the house empty as usual. A chartered car sat outside, waiting to take her into the mountains of Northern California, and Marlene wondered how she had been so naive as to expect more. Her driver was pleasantly wordless, leaving Marlene to stew in her own sea of thoughts as they drove away from the home she had spent her entire life in. Despite the distance every moment was putting between her and the only world she had ever known, Marlene was notably lacking in nostalgic sadness. Marlene had spent 16 years virtually alone inside of the house that was now, by definition, a memory, as was the stream of nannies that had paraded through her younger years in lieu of her parents, doing their best to raise little Marlene, only to be yanked away and replaced before ever establishing a real bond. Marlene's parents wanted her sharp, detached from someone who was in her life simply because they were paid to do so. This strategy also kept everyone who entered the house safely outside of the fold, away from the secrets that practically papered the walls. Whenever she was asked what her parents did for a living that kept them away from home for most of the year, Marlene simply responded with international marketing. It was vague enough to quiet any suspicions and disinteresting enough that no one cared to inquire further. Often, Marlene would imagine their reactions if she decided to tell the truth, even just once. If she let slip that her parents were illustrious vampire hunters who were paid to track and kill creatures of the night in every corner of the world, just as every Cortez had for 10 generations back. The demand for their services kept the Cortezes away from home more often than not, dropping in once or twice a year to the suburban house in which their daughter resided. Marlene knew from a young age to only expect coldness from these visits, as the Cortezes were only there to run quick calculations of how their legacy was stacking up against their expectations. When Marlene considered the word family, her parents were never in the picture. In fact, only one face came to mind: her aunt Josephine, or more commonly, Jo. Marlene hadn't always known about her parents, and during those young years, Jo would blow through Marlene's life like a cyclone to delight her with stories of another world just beyond the reach of their very own that was steeped in the supernatural. The two would sit perched together at the end of Marlene's bed, sipping hot chocolate and nibbling on cookies all night as Jo wove stories about the magical world, a place where Jo would throw birthday parties for werewolf friends she'd known since high school. She'd recount terrible dates with warlocks who were only trying to sell her collections of blessed salamanders. Most frighteningly, she'd tell of shady run-ins with vampires in dim, dusty old pubs, where they served human blood by the bottle. "But it's our secret, Marlene," she would whisper, watching the door for any sign of whichever nanny had rule of the house that month. "The entire supernatural world will be yours one day, as long as you can keep it all a secret for now." Marlene would nod back at her emphatically, pretending to zip her lips with chubby child fingers. Eventually, she reached an age of pre-adolescence when the once whimsical stories now seemed childish. It was when Marlene started to finally push back against the validity of such fantastical stories, as age began to seep into her once sweet and childlike face, that Jo led her to a familiar door nestled in the back of the kitchen pantry. Marlene knew the door well, having tried to shimmy it open countless times but finding it perpetually locked. Her curiosity had run wild over the years as the door endlessly refused to budge, no matter how hard she tugged at the handle. In that moment, Jo produced a key from her pocket, clicking open the once impenetrable lock with ease. The door swung open with a deep groan, revealing a set of stairs descending into darkness too murky and foreboding for a suburban home. "Go ahead," Jo instructed her, watching as Marlene took her first slow, cautious step into the gloom. With each stair, the temperature dropped around them, grazing Marlene's skin with goose pimples. She stepped into a room doused in thick must, nothing visible in the subterranean broom. Something sizzled with a metallic click behind her, and Marlene spun to find Jo illuminated by a cheap plastic lighter. She was lighting a candle strung to the wall by a sconce so ornate, it looked as if it were plucked from a bygone age. Jo made slow work of lighting the candles that surrounded them, but one by one, a hazy glow revealed the shape of the chamber. The stone walls were lined with dark oak shelves, housing a collection of macabre and antique weapons that glinted in the umber light. Marlene stepped closer to stare down the barrel of a grandiose crossbow adorned in gold. Jo's hand was suddenly upon it, causing Marlene to leap back with a gasp. "It was all true, Marlene," Jo told her, gingerly lifting the crossbow into her arms. "Your parents asked me to tell you when the time was right. I always imagined this happening when you were a bit older, but there's no time like the present." Slowly, she lowered the weapon into Marlene's hands, letting her feel the full weight of it. The gold was icy against her palms, and the tangible sensation was enough to awaken her senses, convince her this was not a dream. Common sense told her to panic, to question the very reality of what she was seeing, but her instincts had her fingers tightening around the crossbow, a smile coming to her lips. The word cool came to mind, but this seemed wildly inappropriate in the moment, so she bit it back. It should have been a shock, or a struggle, at least to wrap her mind around the chamber of vampiric antiques that had sat quietly beneath her feet her entire life. A few hours earlier, she had been in the library, arguing with her history study group about how to divide up the work. Now, Marlene had been plunged into a world whose existence seemed manifestly impossible, but all she could feel was bubbling excitement, as if something she had always known was missing was finally clicking into place. From there, the night became a crash course in every misconception the human world held of the supernatural. Vampires and garlic, werewolves and silver, venom-laced bites that could turn a human into a monster. Vampires, werewolves, and witches are a lot like us, Jo explained. They're born, they have parents, grow older, go to school. Can humans turn into vampires? Nope, not unless you're born a vampire. You either are or you aren't. What do you mean they grow? Aren't they immortal? Yes and no, she said. No one is inherently immortal. Immortality is something you earn. How? Joe looked at her, deciding how best to answer this seemingly simple question. When I was younger, I went to a school called Artemis Academy. Actually, your mom went there too. You were in school together? Well, no. Your mom's actually a lot older than me. A lot older. She bit her lip watching Marlene. Your mom graduated about 100 years ago, and I've only been out of school for maybe 40 years. I know I look very good for my age, you don't have to say it. Joe laughed, flipping her hair back. The joke, however, was lost on Marlene as the numbers flitted through her head. Maybe we should take a break and talk about this later. No, I really want to know, Marlene begged, leaning forward as if Joe might make a run for it. I don't get it. You and my mom, you both look so young. Joe took a deep breath, mulling over her words. When I graduated, I was given a gift. This gift kind of froze me in time. Do you understand? I stopped aging right in that moment. You can't die? I can die, but time can't kill me. It's the same for your parents, for witches, vampires, and werewolves. And it will be the same for you, Marlene. I don't get it. If everything goes according to plan, you'll also go to Artemis Academy. 4 years later, when you graduate, the rest of recorded time will be yours. Marlene's eyes grew so wide they threatened to pop out of her head, her heart fluttering uncontrollably in her chest as the promise of forever fluxed through her veins. Her thoughts burst like blooms of fireworks as a 12-year-old girl grappled with the notion of unceasing life. Days earlier, she had still been a neglected only child, prone to sulking about how absolutely average her life was. From that day forward, her eyes were set firmly on one thing, her own destiny. Her peers continued with the mundanity of their lives. Trips to the movies, sneaking out to parties, finding dates to school dances. Marlene played along while others were looking, but in the deep hours of the night when no one was around to watch, she was holed up in her basement, poring through every book her parents had left behind. Every free moment was dedicated to studying vampire anatomy or soaking in the lengthy history of a world that would be hers on a September morning just beyond her 16th birthday. Tucked away in a forgotten grove of thick forest was a secret known only by a chosen few. Inside its halls were girls hand-picked from all over the country, coalescing in a clandestine castle to earn their shot at immortality. Marlene lurched forward as the car slowed, waking her from her reverie. Suddenly, it was quiet enough to hear the pounding of her own heart against her eardrums as her eyes flicked out the window. Aged and withering in white stone was a sign, protruding from a blanket of overgrown vines and moss, planted at the mouth of a crossroad. It read 2 words in chiseled script: Artemis Academy. Marlene dared not take a breath as the driver hit the turn signal.